Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China's economy grew by 4.3% in the second quarter. Australia freezes Chinese investor rights over key rare earth projects. Lebanon and Israel are holding talks in Rome on implementing framework deal. The U.S. House passes a bill to make daylight saving time permanent. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching for World Today. First up, China's gross domestic product increased by 4.7% in the first half of 2026. The world's second largest economy generated some 69.6 trillion yuan in output during the period, or somewhere around 10.3 trillion US dollars. Chinese authorities say the economy withstood pressure and continued to demonstrate great resilience. China's value-added industrial output rose by 5.4%, with equipment manufacturing and high-tech manufacturing posting strong growth momentum. Total retail sales of goods and services increased by 2.7%. China is targeting economic growth of 4.5 to 5% this year. So for more on China's economic performance so far this year, my colleague Zhao Yang earlier spoke with Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow joining us from the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation.
So, Dr. Zhou Mi, thank you very much for joining us. China's GDP grew 4.7% in the first half of the year, despite the global challenges. And this is within the government's annual target. So how would you assess China's economy right now?
Well, as you mentioned, that the annual target of China's GDP this year is from 4.5 to 5%. So 4.7% is pretty good in this kind of region. And I would say that the development of the GDP is very stable. So it's not just about certain areas, it is about all the related areas. So if you are looking at different sectors, for the primary sectors, that it has increased almost 4%, and the manufacturing and the services are speed up compared with the general trend of the GDP. So I would say that the growth of the China's GDP is not just very limited areas, but it's widespread in different regions, and it has a more balanced way for the development.
And as we know, the value-added industrial output rose 5.4%, with high-tech manufacturing jumped over 13%. So do you see the industrial production has remained a key driver of China's economic growth?
Well, yes, compared with agriculture output and also the services value added, I think that the manufacturing, especially for those large companies, are performing the best. So this development of the performance of the industries are really based on the demand. I think that for the world, recovery of the economy, we have to evaluate the development not only based on China's previous month, but also on the general pictures of the world economy. The world is facing many challenges, as IMF has downloaded the prediction of the global output this year. I think that China's performance are really applaudable, and that is kind of a very important information we can get from China's development of the manufacturing. As you have mentioned, the high-tech manufacturing has much faster growth compared with the rest. I think that is based on the demand. The demand is coming from China's domestic demand and also our foreign partners' demand. So we are able to produce the more products, including the 3D printing systems or equipment and the lithium batteries and also the industrial robots. These several products are even having a much faster growth speed compared with the rest. So they have almost reached 50%, 40%, and 30% compared with the same period last year. So I think these kind of products are really showing that China's development in the high-tech areas are really giving the world so many certainties and provide so many possibilities.
And artificial intelligence appears in a lot of discussions about China's economy, from chips to intelligent manufacturing. So, how much of today's economic performance is already being influenced by AI rather than the traditional industries?
Well, I would say that is a really lot of impacts, as I just mentioned about the AI related products, including the industrial robots. They are really supported by the technology itself. Without abilities on the chips, on the AI related chips, we are not able to provide the factories so many abilities to dealing with large scale of development. Well, I think that AI is also provide the possibilities for the people to have a better consumption products, including what we are using now in the household, including those kind of robots for cleanings and also the air conditionings or even the televisions. I think that is really our what we are able to say. So from the consumption to the import and export to the investment, I can find that AI has impacted all the related areas, and certainly it is one of the most attractive areas for the investors to put their money in. So the AI is still are promising in China's development of the economy. They are connecting different areas and make that products more intelligent and also giving a better solutions for us to deal with challenges. I think that is what we can expect for the better performance because China's market is super large and we are providing so many large scale scenarios for those applications. And the AI companies are really interested in investing in China to improve their abilities. Well, another area I also want to mention is about China's open source, for the big model, and the DeepSeek and other kind of companies are providing the world with so many free or open sources on the development of the artificial intelligence. I think that is really able to provide a better and more transparent ecosystem.
And China's foreign trade was up nearly 17% in the first half of this year. So, what are driving this growth, especially under the slowdown of global trade?
Well, yes, I agree with you that IMF has predicted our download of the global trade for this year of 2026. So China is really performing out of the other competitors. So the driving force is coming from many factors. First of all, I think that the trade in the import has a much higher growth rate compared with the export. So China is sharing with the world about our market opportunities. We can import more things from other countries, no matter from the minerals to the agricultural products. And the second area is about the export. China is giving the world so many supporting abilities, including strengthening the resilience of the supply chains and also trying to giving them, intermediate products and also the part of these industrial products, which is very important for them industrialization, and we are giving them more innovative products. I think on all these three areas, China is supporting the world with a better and more sustainable export. So this development is mean that the world is trusting China even better than before.
And the imports grow faster than exports, rising more than 22% year on year. So, what is China buying more of, and what does that tell us about the domestic demand and industrial upgrading?
So the import means that China is buying more things from other countries. First of all, China have a super large market, so we are able to provide the world with many opportunities based on our population basis. And the second, I think that diversification is really what we are able to provide the world. Some people like to have some fruits from the Southeast Asia. Some people like to have the fruits from the Latin America. So we are able to provide the world with so many different demands. And the third one is that we are able to buy more minerals, resources, and also some of the raw materials which is very crucial for those mineral and the resources exporting countries. So the imports are showing China is willing to open our markets, to create better platforms, and trying to introduce the world with more certainties.
Mm. And the policymakers continue to emphasize expanding the domestic consumption. We've seen the retail sales of goods and services expanded by 2.7% in the first 6 months of this year. So, what's your observation on that? And retail sales of services see faster growth than the sales of consumer goods. So, what does this tell us about the transformation of China's economy?
Well, as you mentioned, that the consumption is a really important thing in China's economy, but it's not performing as good as the industrial output. So I think that is very important for us to understand that consumption is not just for short-term targets. We want to have a better and a sustainable consumption development in the coming years, especially for the 15th five-year plans period. We want to strengthen the abilities for the consumption in a better way. So the consumption are not only limited in the consumption in goods. We are trying to expand the room or the space for the consumption in the services. So we are getting a better scenarios or policy framework to stimulate and create a better room for the development of these services for better consumptions. So this kind of integration are not just based on certain areas. We want to have a more integrated domestic market. I think that is are kind of things we need to address in the coming years. We are going to support the consumption in the services for a better development and more stabilities.
And the government is also placing greater emphasis on services consumption, from healthcare, elderly care to education, sports, and digital services. So why have the emphasis shifted from simply buying more goods to consuming more services?
Well, it's true that when you are going to buy some goods, maybe you need that, but you are not just trying to abandon them or throw them away in the short term. So the consumption in the goods has some stabilities. We are not trying to renew our products in the annual basis. But the services are different because services cannot be stored. They have to be consumed when the suppliers are giving the services to the consumers. So this is a very big differences compared with the consumption in the goods. And the second, I want to say that as you mentioned, those services are what the Chinese people really need. The tourism, the better taking care of this healthcare and the elders care. I think these kind of things are what we need to improve our living conditions. And we are facing many challenges also about the aging problems, about how to take care of our younger children. So I think based on all this demand, we are able to provide a better supply of the services. So it's based on the market. We are trying to connect the two sides and trying to encourage the development of the services industries to support the development of the consumption in services.
And China's long-term goal is to build a more innovation-driven, consumption-led, high-quality economy. So based on what we are seeing today, how far along is that transition?
Well, there still needs some time because first of all, we need to make people understand the importance of doing that. And second, we need to have some policies to lead the flow of the resources in that areas and in that mode. And the third one, I think that they need some examples to follow, like whether they can have a better return by doing that. So based on all these combined factors, I would say that we still need some time. We need still be patient, but this opportunities can also be shared by our foreign investors if they really want to come here to China.
And if you had to identify the biggest opportunity for China's economy over the next few years, what would that be?
I would say that trying to grasp the opportunities of China's super large market. The market is so interesting and it has so many diversified demand. So no matter which areas you are able to provide, you can try to let us know that you are able to connect with China and we can do it together to share the opportunities together.
Well, that was Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow joining us from Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, talking with my colleague Zhao Yang. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I am Dr. Digby James Wren, a political analyst and international relations scholar specializing in China area studies. World Today offers unmatched in-depth perspectives on China's politics, economics, business, technology, and society. World Today's team of reporters and contributors provides valuable information from all of the world's major economies. I hope you can join me on World Today for the very best insights and news from China, on China, and help to build a better understanding of China's role in the world today.
You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. 6 Chinese commercial banks have launched credit and debit cards bound to AI providers. After accumulating certain level of points, cardholders can then directly redeem the points for using AI models. In other words, bank cards have now become some kind of entry point for users to access artificial intelligence services such as large language model token packages or AI office tools. The 6 Chinese lenders include Bank of Communication, Agricultural Bank of China, Shanghai Pudong Development Bank, Ping An Bank, My Bank, as well as the China Merchants Bank. So for more, joining us now on the line is Professor Liu Baochen, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics, joining us from the University of International Business and Economics. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Liu Baochen.
Hi, Ding. It's always a pleasure.
First of all, why do you think the commercial banks are launching these cards? What is their ultimate goal?
Well, many commercial banks are under pressure to reinvent their attraction to those customers. Now, these initiatives are there to target most of those AI-savvy users. But I think now, honestly, it's a premature stage to comment. The main attraction is not really something that you can offer a token because those AI savvy users already subscribe to professional AI services directly. And more importantly, the mobile payment ecosystem has been so mature. They have been making the digital services extremely convenient, from street vendors to shopping malls to hotels. And I'm now, as part of the APEC integration system, we are also talking about more of a QR payment that is there to spread across the Asian Pacific region. So this trend cannot be reversed simply by such sort of efforts. So in this sense, AI tokens are simply another form of loyalty rewards designed to encourage the credit card or debit card usage. So the deeper motivation, I think, is that banks are searching for new ways to differentiate themselves. And these 6 banks are really the early birds for such a trial. The traditional credit card benefits have become increasingly homogeneous. So the transaction growth has slowed since the 8 years ago. So associating their brand with the AI can really help banks to project some innovative images and appeal to younger digital users. So the ultimate goal is not really to distribute token or AI token as a sort of a redemption, but rather to strengthen customers' engagement and position themselves for the next stage of digital finance. So this is really the ultimate goal that they need to pursue.
Okay. So most of these lenders have actually chosen a cooperative architecture of bank plus clearing plus AI model vendor. They use their bank cards as carriers, and AI services are provided by tech companies like Alibaba or Tencent or some of their smaller units, while the clearing services are largely taken care by China UnionPay. How do you look at this model?
Well, this model is very encouraging. It is pragmatic and also synergetic because each participant can contribute to their with their distinctive capacity, banks provide financial service, customer relations, and regulatory compliance. UnionPay, as in a dominant position, provides secure payment infrastructure. AI companies contribute to the models and also with very practical applications. So at this stage, however, the cooperation is relatively light. The banks are essentially distributing a third-party AI service rather than fundamentally changing how they really operate and benefit the people with their own financial AI type of professional service. So the more meaningful question is whether the partnership can really evolve if future collaboration can extend into AI-powered financial advices, intelligent risk assessment, personalized wealth management, and more efficient customer service provided with more of security protection, then it could really become strategically significant. So if it remains limited to simply redeeming some reward points for AI subscribers, its impact is really very moderate.
Competition in China's banking sector is very fierce, very, very intense. And I think this is a point you made earlier, Professor Liu. Some of the services provided by different banks, different brands, for example, in the realm of credit card, are getting too homogeneous nowadays. So, what do you think the trend we're talking about today might mean to China's banking sector? I mean, the competition, for example, over the longer term?
Yes, I think Chinese banks are really waking up to the mounting pressure they face in terms of competition, in terms of the customers' fatigue. So they need to differentiate themselves in an increasingly competitive marketplace. But I wouldn't really overestimate its immediate significance. One AI-themed credit card is unlikely to change customer behavior dramatically, and it won't really increase a large amount of applications because they target more to those AI-savvy users. Especially when payment channels are already highly convenient and AI subscriptions are already available. So how they can really compete with now the mobile payment is really a longer battle that need to face. So the longer term application is different because it suggests that banks already recognize the AI will become increasingly important to the digital economy, and they don't want to be left behind of such a rising ecosystem. So the real competition won't be over who offers additional AI tokens. It will be over who can use AI to make financial services more convenient, smarter, and more efficient, and more personalized. So while they can really maintain the type of security and also customer trust and long-term engagements.
For people working in China's banking sector, what do you make of the possible implications? I mean, when we talk about this trend?
Well, first they need people are there to need more of the narratives, how they can really convince customers of the real benefit that this combination can really offer. Yeah. And second, they need to delve into deeper knowledge as how to take care of the customer's asset management and provide additional benefits that's there to convince those base customers. And plus that they need also to penetrate into different segments of the market, from the elderly care into the travelers and also into child care, etc., how they can really combine a sort of one-stop solution. So this is something that they need to consider with more of the knowledge, with more of the care, and while they can really employ the AI-powered services.
Thank you very much for joining us. Professor Liu Baochen, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics, joining us from the University of International Business and Economics. You are listening to World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. We'll be back after a very short break. You are listening to World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. The Australian government is moving to block the shareholder rights of 3 China-linked investors in a rare earth miner. According to the Western Australia-based Northern Minerals, Treasurer Jim Chalmers has issued orders preventing 3 investors on the company's share register from voting or exercising any other rights at future meetings. The step we are talking about here is following earlier orders that forced them to sell their stock. A government spokesperson claimed that the decision was about protecting Australia's national interests and ensuring compliance with the country's foreign investment framework. Is that really legitimate grounds for these measures? Joining us now on the line is Professor Chen Hong, Director of Australian Studies Center from East China Normal University. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Chen.
Thank you.
So, really, this is an unprecedented action in Australia, to say the least. First of all, was these 3 China-linked shareholders blocked from voting and facing forced divestment? How could this rare earth miner be affected as a result?
Well, the immediate effect will definitely be to weaken, shareholder influence over Northern Minerals, while giving this company's management greater freedom to pursue Australian and also US-backed financing from the Browns Range project. The affected holdings represent a substantial block of shares, and the earlier divestment orders by Jim Chalmers also covered about 17.6% of the company's issued capital. So removing voting rights may prevent disputes over board appointments or corporate strategy, but it does not solve the company's fundamental commercial challenges. Northern Minerals remain a relatively small producer that still requires substantial capital, advanced processing technology, infrastructure, and reliable long-term customers before it can become a significant supplier of heavy rare earth. So forced divestments may also depress the share price, complicate future fundraising and increase uncertainty among other investors who may question whether commercial rights can be altered after an investment has already been approved. So in the short term, the Australian government may achieve tighter political control over the ownership structure, but in the long term, it risks increasing financing costs and undermining investor confidence. So political intervention does not necessarily translate into commercial success, and the viability of the project will ultimately depend on market fundamentals rather than ownership alone.
So, in other words, in your opinion, national security is being turned into a flexible political tool in Australia?
Yeah, definitely. Australia certainly, obviously has its sovereign right to review, foreign investments in genuinely sensitive sectors, and no country would dispute that principle. But the real concern is whether national interest and national security are being defined too broadly and applied selectively. So in this case, the Australian government has not publicly demonstrated that these minority shareholders were transferring, for example, sensitive technology and exercising operational control or directing strategic decisions in a way that would threaten Australia's security. So instead, the Chinese links themselves appear to have become sufficient grounds for Australian government's intervention. So that creates an uncomfortable precedent when investors can legally acquire shares, receive regulatory approval, and then later have their voting rights suspended and their assets, subject to compulsory disposal under the increasingly elastic, interpretation of national security. Confidence in the stability of Australia's investment environment inevitably suffers. So international investors value transparency, consistency, and legal predictability. If the so-called security considerations become completely, intertwined with geopolitical strategy, Australia risks, creating the impression that the political alignment matters more, than the commercial conduct.
Okay. So, if we take a look at the previous round of deterioration of China-Australia relationship several years ago, a major incident marking that trend at the time was Australia's ban of Huawei. So, looking at this latest case over rare earths and its relevant investment in Australia, do you think the broader relationship between the two countries will worsen again due to this particular case?
Well, I do not believe this single case will send China-Australia relations back to the darkest period associated with the Huawei ban, but it should certainly be viewed as a warning signal. The Huawei decision became significant because it demonstrated how commercial and technological issues could be absorbed into a much broader geopolitical confrontation. Rare earths are now increasingly, being treated through a similar strategic lens. The important difference today is that both governments, both the Chinese and Australian governments, have learned costly lessons from the previous deterioration. So both Beijing and Canberra recognize the enormous economic benefits of a stable bilateral relationship and therefore have stronger incentives to manage disagreements without allowing them to escalate into a broader confrontation. But however, if Canberra repeatedly excludes Chinese participation from sectors such as critical minerals, ports, energy infrastructure, and advanced technology, that cumulative message will become increasingly difficult to ignore. Australia will effectively be signaling that Chinese trade is welcome while Chinese investment is not.
Yeah. Now, since you talk about this, I mean, Australia definitely wants more trade with China, especially selling more products to the Chinese market. That's a major reason why Anthony Albanese, the prime minister, has moved to repair his country's ties with China. But when we talk about receiving investment from China, its sentiment is in many ways different. Like you mentioned, if we take a look at their public opinion polls conducted by, for example, by some of the think tanks in Australia. But ultimately, do you think trade and investment can be separated from one another?
Well, trade and investments may be governed by different legal frameworks, but economically and politically, they are closely connected and cannot be separated indefinitely. So in many mature economic relationships, trade and investments reinforce one another. Australia, therefore, cannot realistically expect China to remain one of its largest export markets while simultaneously treating Chinese investors as inherently suspect whenever they seek meaningful participation in Australian industries. Such an approach reduces China to the role of a customer while denying Chinese companies the same commercial opportunities available to investors from many other countries. That creates an imbalance which is difficult to sustain over time. So business confidence depends not only on market access, but also on reciprocal opportunities. So if investment barriers continue to expand while trade continues to grow, the relationship becomes increasingly asymmetrical and vulnerable to political tensions. A healthy bilateral economic relationship requires both sides to participate not only as buyers and sellers, but also as long-term investment partners.
Lastly and briefly, Professor Chen Hong, in a bigger picture sense, we understand addressing the rare earth supply chains is now a political goal for Western allies working together. But do you think blocking Chinese capital will actually help in terms of really building a so-called independent supply chain?
Blocking Chinese capital will not create an independent rare earth supply chain. It may change the nationality of shareholders, but it does not automatically provide processing technology, experienced engineers, competitive production costs supporting infrastructure or downstream manufacturing ecosystem. China's leading position in rare earths was not created simply because it possessed abundant resources. It was built over decades through sustained investment, industry coordination, technological innovation, refining capability, and economies of scale across the entire supply chain. So Western countries certainly have the rights to diversify supply chains. However, diversification requires commercially viable projects. Chinese participation, should be regarded as valuable. So politically motivated restrictions may instead increase, project costs, to delay production and reduce financing options. So in many cases, actually excluding experienced investors even slowed the very projects so that there was no, meaningful supply security at all. So a genuinely resilient supply chain may be diversified, but it needs to be commercially sustainable and open to fair competition. A supply chain designed primarily around, excluding China will not attain independence. It is simply driven by geopolitical calculations rather than by economic considerations.
Thank you very much for joining us. Professor Chen Hong, Director of the Australian Studies Center, joining us from East China Normal University. This is World Today. We'll be back. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Lebanon and Israel have resumed talks in the city of Rome to discuss how to implement a U.S.-brokered framework deal aimed at ending the war in Lebanon. A U.S. State Department official says both sides are eager to move forward. Israel says it is ready to move forward with a plan to withdraw troops from 2 areas of southern Lebanon. The agreement was reached in Washington, D.C. late last month. It calls for an end to Israel's war on Lebanon and the disarmament of armed groups. However, deadly Israeli attacks in southern Lebanon have continued, and Hezbollah has rejected this particular agreement as well as any effort to disarm the Hezbollah. So for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. Zhang Chuchu, Deputy Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, Fudan University. So thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Zhang Chuchu.
Thank you for having me.
Israel's military is occupying what it describes as a buffer zone about 10 kilometers into Lebanon along the entire length of the Israeli border. Do you see genuine willingness on the part of the Israeli side to withdraw?
Well, I think it's very hard. So far, we can see that Israel has signaled a willingness for limited phased deployment through the pilot zones outlined in the Drone Framework Agreement, and with some preparatory movements already reported on the ground. However, its overall stance remains firmly conditions-based. For example, it requires any full or significant withdrawal from the broader buffer zone explicitly linked to the verifiable disarmament of the non-state armed groups. And Lebanon's armed forces demonstrated effective control of the area. Also, Israeli leaders continue to emphasize critical security imperatives, arguing that the current presence is necessary to protect northern communities. So I think all these actions suggest that while there is openness to incremental steps during the ongoing Rome talks and subsequent rounds, a comprehensive withdrawal from the occupied territories is not on the immediate horizon and will depend heavily on tangible progress in security arrangements.
Lebanon's president had actually instructed the Lebanese delegation ahead of the talks in Rome to demand the immediate withdrawal of Israeli forces before any further discussions regarding other issues with the Israeli delegation. So why do you think Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon is the top concern to Lebanon?
Well, indeed, so far that is the utmost concern because the Israeli occupation touches the very essence of Lebanese state sovereignty and also its national unity. So for Lebanon, the continued presence of Israeli forces on its sovereign territory, even when framed as a so-called temporary security measure, severely undermines the governmental authority, and that delays the safe return of hundreds of and thousands of displaced populations and significantly complicates post-conflict reconstruction efforts in the south part. And it also risks deepening existing internal political fractures and sectarian tensions at a critical moment. President Joseph Aoun's firm emphasis on immediate withdrawal as a precondition for further discussions actually underscores a core national principle, and that is meaningful and productive dialogue can only advance once Lebanon's territorial integrity is visibly respected and restored. So I think this position prioritizes the restoration of full Lebanese control over its land as the essential foundation for any sustainable security arrangement.
The framework deal reached in Washington, D.C. late last month actually envisions the deployment of Lebanese troops to the southern Lebanon. But in reality, do you think the army, the Lebanese army, is capable of gradually taking control of the localities from which the Israeli army would withdraw, if that's going to happen?
Right. Actually, the Lebanese armed forces have already demonstrated a growing operational presence in southern Lebanon in recent years, including expanded deployments, increased checkpoints, and also enhanced coordination with international partners such as UNIFIL, etc. And these developments reflects a strengthened capacity to assert state authority in the region. However, the success of gradually taking control of localities from Israeli withdrawal zones will hinge on several very critical factors. For example, achieving sufficient political consensus across Lebanon's diverse factions, securing adequate logistical and financial support, and also maintaining exclusive state authority without significant interference from non-state actors. So while the Lebanese armed forces remains a legitimate institution for this role, the transition process is very likely to be complex and protracted. So this will require sustained international backing to build the long-term institutional capacity necessity for lasting stability. So overall, I think there are still a lot of work to do at this stage.
So, by the way, based on what you have elaborated, Dr. Zhang Chuchu, what could be the potential barriers or obstacles for political consensus between, say, Hezbollah and Lebanon's government?
Right. I think there are still a lot of variables at this moment, and my observation is that the biggest obstacle or the biggest variable here is the ongoing situation and interaction between the United States and Iran. Because I would say the overall outlook for tensions between Lebanon and Israel remains grim, because we know that Israel has never signed the Memorandum of Understanding. So although at the very beginning the conflict was between the United States, Israel, and Iran, Israel has repeatedly stated that this document is not binding on it. And although Iran has always insisted that there should also be a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, Israel does not seem to have the full intention to do it. So Israeli officials, they have frequently declared that their primary goal is to deal a heavy blow to Hezbollah, viewing the current buffer zone as essential for the so-called security issue. So against the backdrop of renewed tensions between the United States and Iran, the fragile standoff between Israel and Lebanon could actually easily escalate once again. And I would say another key risk here is that the broader US-Iran dynamics might also divert diplomatic attention and resources away from Lebanon, for instance. So thereby, it might slow the implementation of pilot zones and undermining the already delicate framework agreement reached in June. So without sustained international mediation, the prospects for lasting de-escalation appear increasingly uncertain.
Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Zhang Chuchu, Deputy Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, joining us from Fudan University. You're listening to World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Yin Liang, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University. In a rapidly changing world, staying informed has never been more important. World Today delivers sharp analysis, global perspectives, and the stories behind the headlines. It is your trusted source to understand what's shaping our world. World Today, bringing the world closer.
You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill to make daylight saving time permanent and putting an end to the twice-a-year clock changes used across most of the country for decades. The Sunshine Protection Act would keep the country on time now observed from March through November, unless a state exempted itself before the act took effect. The bill is now heading to the U.S. Senate for consideration before going to the president for his signature, though its prospects in the upper chamber remain uncertain. U.S. President Donald Trump has supported ending the clock changes. The United States has previously adopted year-round daylight saving time during the Second World War and once again in the year 1974. But Congress reversed the 1974 change after public opposition. So for more, joining us now in the studio is my colleague Song Ruixing. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, what does this particular bill we are talking about here actually do?
Sure. So the basic idea is actually pretty simple. The Sunshine Protection Act would make daylight saving time permanent. So Americans would no longer have to change their clocks twice a year, which means no more spring forward in March or fall back in November. Then now, what does this mean? Just imagine it's December or November. Instead of getting dark at around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, you'd have an extra hour of daylight in the evening. So, and then the flip side, though, is that the sun would also come up and an hour later in the morning. So, and this isn't a brand new idea, to be honest. The US tried something very similar during the 1970s, like you said, during that energy crisis. But people quickly complained about those very dark winter mornings, so it didn't last. For today, a number of states have already said they are ready to switch if Congress gives them the go-ahead. So really, this bill is about making that possible nationwide. I have to say there's one important point is that individual states can't simply decide to stay on daylight saving time permanently. And under current federal law, they can opt out of daylight saving time altogether. Like, for example, like Hawaii, if I remember it right, and most of Arizona have done. But they can't adopt permanent daylight saving time without Congress changing the law first. And that's why this vote matters.
Here in China, we don't really have daylight saving, but I guess the United States is not the only country in the world that does have daylight saving. So in the case of the United States, why do you think there is such strong support for ending this twice yearly clock change?
I think, first of all, people are just fed up with changing the clocks twice a year. When daylight saving time was first introduced, it was supposed to save energy and make better use of daylight. But then a lot of Americans now question whether those benefits still exist in today's economy. And then there's also growing evidence that changing the clocks can affect people's health, like researchers have linked it to disrupted sleep and more workplace injuries and even an increase in traffic accidents immediately after like spring clock change. And then there is a practical side. Like supporters argue that lighter evenings encourage people to go out more, whether like shopping, eating out, or exercising after work. Although I have to say that, having said that, if you are still presenting the program at 7 or 8, you probably don't get to enjoying any of that. So
Yeah.
businesses like retailers and restaurants tend to support the idea as well. And what's interesting is that this has become one of those rare issues when Democrats and Republicans actually agree on that goal, even if they don't always agree on the reasons. For example, President Trump, he has called the current system ridiculous and says it's time to get rid of it. So for supporters, the feelings is like the hassle of changing the clocks now outweighs whatever benefits it once had.
So if this bill does become law, what actual impacts will average Americans notice or feel?
The biggest difference would really come during the winter. Just think about it. With finishing work in late winter, instead of walking out into darkness at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, you still have some daylight left. And a lot of people would see that as a real improvement. But of course, there's a trade-off. I'd say if you live in the north part of the country, you could be getting up and taking your children to school or commuting to work before the sun has even come up. And then in some places, sunrise wouldn't be until like almost 9 o'clock in the morning. So it really depends on your lifestyle. If you're someone who enjoys being outdoors after work, you might love the extra evening daylight. But if you are a like farmer or construction worker or someone who starts work very early, you might actually prefer some more light in the morning. And that's why this debate has lasted so long, and most people agree the current system is frustrating.
So, by the way, what is the biggest, obstacle or the biggest controversy surrounding this particular proposal?
I did some research. Some of the strongest criticism actually comes from sleep scientists. Now they are not necessarily defending the current system, and many of them agree that changing the clocks twice a year isn't ideal. Where they disagree is which time should become permanent. In some ways, they are arguing that standard time is much more closely aligned with our natural body clock because it gives us more morning sunlight, and that's important for let's say, sleep and concentration and overall health. And then there are some practical concerns as well. So it isn't really about whether to stop changing the clocks. It's about whether brighter evenings are worth darker mornings.
So very briefly, the final question before we let you go: how likely is this bill likely to become a law?
Well, the House has now done its part, so the next stop is the Senate. Interesting, they've actually been there before. A similar bill passed the Senate back in 2022, but it never made it through the House. This time it's the other way round, so now all eyes are on the Senate. If they approve it as well, it will go to President Trump. And given that he's rapidly said he wants to end the twice-year clock changes, most people expect he would sign it. That said, I wouldn't say it's a done deal. So until Congress can settle that question, I think the debate is likely to continue.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was my colleague Song Ruixing joining us in our Beijing studio. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on our previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching for World Today. For further discussion, you can follow us on X at CGTN Radio. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.